Welcome to episode 175 of the show with no name. I'm your humble host, Nick, and today we're going to be exploring this amazing old Farmers Pioneer Cemetery out here in Spangle, Washington. This cemetery goes by the name of the Spangle Cemetery. And this cemetery has a lot of history, and there's a lot of people I have to talk about here. So let's get into this. Ella Ruby Mill Bauer was born on January 4th, 1885, in a frame house approximately 16 foot by 20 foot. The house had an upstairs loft and a dirt floor, and it sat on her grandfather's homestead near Spangle, Washington. The family moved from Oregon to Spangle, Washington in 1880 and homesteaded. Her grandpa, Robert Mill, purchased the 320-acre homestead for around $300 at the time. Robert Mill would purchase and homestead another 80 acres in December of 1885. The 16-foot by 20-foot house was dragged by horses to the property lines of the two properties in the spring of 1886. They lived in this frame house until 1903, when Papa John built a new house on the 80-acre homestead of Robert Mill. As a young girl, Ella played in the fields, and as she grew older, she had chores to do. Ella and her sister Mary hitched up the horses to the wagon every morning and fetched fresh water for the house. The well was a short distance east of the mill house up on a draw. Ella and her sister Mary also fed the animals twice a day, and as she grew older, helped her mom cook for Brother Robert and Papa John and any farmhand that needed something to eat. The family also had an orchard on their property with red apples, yellow apples, and plums. When the fruit was ready to be picked, Mom, Ella, and little sister Mary would hitch up the horses to the wagon and pick the fruit. In the early 1900s, she met the love of her life, George Bauer. George had a 400-acre farm. The farm was about a 10-minute horse ride away from the mill farm. The courtship went on for a few years, and on July 23, 1905, they would marry. On May 17, 1907, a son was born to Ella and George. His name was John. The delivery was hard, and after hours of hard labor, the attending physician, who was young and inexperienced, used forceps to pull the child from the womb. Baby John would survive, but in the early morning the next day, on May 18, 1907, Ella would pass away. Charles Began was born on October 11, 1873 in California. He would pass away on August 6, 1883. He was just 9 years old. An old newspaper clipping reads, "A sad accident. Reverend T.J. Cannon sends us the following particulars of the saddest incident we have had to record in a long time. On Monday morning, August 6th, Mr. Began and his little son Charlie started to go to Smith's sawmill to haul a load of lumber. The boy was sitting in the front driving the team, while the father was sitting on the hind part of the wagon, and they were passing the farm of Mrs. M. Sanders. One of the horses in some way slipped his bridle off, and both horses started to run. Mr. Began tried to get to the lines, but failing called to the boy to jump from the wagon, which Mr. Began thinks he did, but fell with his head under the forewheel, which crushed his head, killing him instantly. It is supposed that both the fore and hind wheels ran over his head. The lifeless body was taken to the house of Mr. Saunders a few minutes after the accident and remained there until the funeral. Alan Campbell was born on September 28, 1895 in Missouri, and he died on October 27, 1909. He was just 15 years old. The Spokesman Review, October 28, 1909 reads, Alan Campbell is killed when horse falls on him. October 27th, Alan Campbell, a 15-year-old boy living 1 mile west of town, was crushed to death near the high school building this evening by his saddle pony. He was driving a cow when his horse stumbled, throwing him in a ditch and falling on him, fracturing his skull. High school students leaving the building carried him to the home of his brother, where he died a few minutes later without regaining consciousness. Robert Campbell was born on March 4th, 1923, and he would pass away on April 24th, 1945 in Italy. He was just 22 years old. The Spokesman Review on May 12, 1945 reads, Sergeant Robert Campbell of Spangle, Washington, was reported killed in action in Italy, according to word received yesterday by his parents. Roy Davis was born on May 22, 1886, in Iowa, and he would pass away on October 1, 1964, in Idaho. He was 77 years old. The Spokane Chronicle on October 2, 1964 reads, Roy Davis, 87, died at his home in the McGuire area near here this week. Sheriff's officers yesterday estimated the time of death at between 2 and 5 p.m. Wednesday, and said that the death was from a bullet wound, apparently self-inflicted. Mary Ann Hinton was born on February 9, 1858, and she passed away on December 8, 1889 in Spangle, Washington. I found an article that reads, "Strangled herself. The wife of prominent Spokane farmer suicides while insane." Mrs. Hinton, wife of a well-to-do farmer living 1 mile west of Spangle, died very suddenly early Sunday morning under somewhat tragic circumstances, which point to suicide. A few days ago, she became violently insane, but was quieted at the time. Since then, she has uttered threats against her own life, and the family were considering the possibility of placing her in the asylum. About 5 o'clock Sunday morning, she complained of pains in her head and asked Mr. Hinton to arise and heat water so that she might bathe her head. He did so, as this had become a common occurrence as of late, and entertained no fears of his wife attempting suicide, and retired to his bed. Soon after, some of the children discovered their mother in the smokehouse. She was lying upon the inclined floor with her head downward, a towel twisted tightly around her neck. She was quite dead when discovered. The facts were explained to the authorities, who did not consider an investigation necessary. Mrs. Hinton leaves a large family of children, some of whom are grown, to mourn her loss. Howard Lee Hodgson was born on October 23, 1925 in Spokane County. He would pass away on May 23, 1945 at the young age of 19 while serving in World War II. He served in the infantry and he was killed in action by a sniper. Now, I couldn't find this guy's headstone anywhere in the cemetery here in Spangle, nor could I find anybody in his family, but I know he's buried here somewhere, probably in an unmarked grave, and his name was John Miles. I found an article in the Spokane Daily Chronicle that reads, "Found dead in the road, John Miles, leader of the cattle thieves, is killed by Pew." In a gunfight at the Miles Ranch, the rustler received a ball in his breast. He assumed death and the officers left him. He then mounted a horse and started for Spangle, but death overtook him on the way. The anguish of a mother when she stumbled over the body of her wounded son. John Miles, the cattle thief, is dead. He was found lying in the road near Spangle today. Sheriff Pugh is unhurt, and none of his deputies have been at all injured. Yesterday afternoon, when the sheriff and his deputy Felix left for Miles Ranch, about 18 miles southwest of the city, they went well armed and determined to capture Miles. They realized that Johnny Miles was the most desperate man in a desperate gang. Deputy Felix has not parted with his shotgun since the first arrest was made. The sheriff knew just where the Miles residence was located. And when they got within about 5 miles of the house, they put up their rig at a rancher's and proceeded the rest of the way on foot. Everything about the Miles house seemed to be quiet as they approached it. No sound warned them that they were under the cover of 2 Colt revolvers. Felix knocked at the door and was about to demand admittance when the command, "Throw up your hands," rang out. Of course, nothing was to be done but obey. But in throwing up his hands, Felix's hand got caught in his gun, and the result was that 4 shots were fired by the deputy, one of which hit Miles in the chest. Miles was not idle, and bullets were whizzing through the air at a great rate. The old man Miles has frequently been concerned in questionable transactions, and the sheriff knew that unless they got away from the house, they would be between 2 fires. They had seen Johnny Miles put his hand on his chest and fall, and were satisfied that he could not escape. They retreated some distance from the house, and soon saw the door open, and Miles's parents and younger brother came out. After she caught sight of her son's body, Mrs. Miles cried out, "Oh, Johnny, they have killed you." Johnny Miles was unconscious, or appeared to be. He was carried into the house, and the officers entered and made a thorough search for any other rounders that might be there. There were none. Miles appeared to be in a dying condition, and it being a seemingly impossibility for him to escape, they left the house to search for other persons of whom suspicion had fallen. When the officers returned to look for their prisoner, and were astonished to find that the man who was wounded in a manner in which afterwards proved fatal had mounted a horse and rode off. As best they could, they traced the sharp imprints of the horse's hoofs in the half-frozen mud of the road. As soon as they learned the direction in which the wounded prisoner was going, they secured horses and started in hot pursuit. They had been thrown off the trail, for while they were riding in a southeasterly direction, the wounded bandit was riding at full speed toward Spangle, near which the village he had relatives whose house would afford shelter and security. Many times he was obliged to stop and again bandage the wound, of which his lifeblood was fast ebbing. When within about 2 miles of Spangle, he fell from his horse and died in the road. The 2 persons who found him did not know John Miles, but the fact that he was shot through the chest and the description of the body was complete bears no doubt as to the identity of the dead man. The death of John Miles is an affair for which no one but his relatives will feel the least regret. He was a bold and desperate man. Many times, when he has been caught with cattle, he leveled his gun and converted his pursuer into his assistant. Near Spangle, some time ago, Miles was in the act of driving off some cattle. The rancher discovered him and drew a rifle on him, telling him that if he made another move, he would shoot him dead. Miles grabbed the end of the rifle barrel and wrestled the weapon from the owner's grasp, and drawing his revolver, commanded the old man to dance. He danced. Then he made him get a horse and assist in driving his own cattle away. When he had gone a few miles, and the cattle had become tired out and less unruly, he told him to go home, which command the farmer obeyed. Before letting him leave, Miles told him that pursuit would be useless, but that if it was attempted, he would shoot him as he would a dog. Notwithstanding the threat, the farmer gathered a posse and pursued Miles, but by then he had disappeared. Martha Miller was born on July 11, 1880 in Minnesota, and she would live to be 104 years old, passing away on March 22, 1985. Otto Hermann Schmidt was born on July 28, 1893, and he would live to be 108 years old, passing away on December 7, 2001. Charlie Schroll was born on October 11, 1829 in Switzerland, and he would live to be 103 years old, passing away on November 20th, 1932 in Spokane County. William Spangle was born on December 4th, 1834 in Illinois. He would pass away on October 1st, 1912. He was the founder of Spangle, and the cemetery bears his name. The Spokesman Review article that I found reads, "Kidney trouble causes death of pioneer settler. Settled on squatter's claim in 1872. Residing there up to the time of death." William Spangle died this morning at 5 o'clock after a lingering illness from kidney trouble. Mr. Spangle was born in Jersey County, Illinois, on December 4th, 1834. He was married to Mrs. Christina Berger on April 3rd, 1868, and settled in Illinois. 2 sons and 1 daughter survive. Mr. Spangle was a pioneer of Illinois and Washington. He was in the Civil War, and he served a short term in Libby Prison during the war. William came here with his family in 1871 and took a squatter's claim in March 1872, where he lived up to the time of his death. At that time, Spokane Falls had but 1 house. Mr. Spangle was appointed postmaster in March 1876 and served until 1882. He was the founder and father of Spangle.